Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
All right, so tomorrow is Election Day in Rhode Island. The primary is finally here. It feels like we've been building towards this since the evening of the general election in 2018. Joining me in studio is the one and only Dan McGowan, columnist of the Boston Globe. Sir, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me. You're right. I feel like I've been, at least some of these races, we've been talking about them for even longer than that. We've been talking about it since, 2014 in some cases, when you think about Providence mayor or who's going to replace Gina Raimondo as the governor. It's been 8 years of talking about who's next.
It's incredible, and it's shaping up even at the last minute where Helena Foulkes is certainly cresting. At the same time, today we have this news of Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott, former health director here in Rhode Island, endorsing Ms. Bonanno-Foulkes. And that's, on the one hand, when you couple that with the entirety of the conversation around, the CVS Tom Ryan versus Dan McKee thing that's taken place over the last few days with McKee's attack ad accusing folks of pumping opioids into the community. It's almost like that can work both ways, because there's going to be people who say, look, I love Dr. Alexander Scott. She got us through the pandemic. She's a tried and proven leader here in Rhode Island. So if she says Foulkes is the way to go, I'm going Foulkes. Then there's going to be other people who are going to say, well, these restrictions were draconian. They destroyed my business, whatever it is. The last person I want to vote for is someone who's associated with Dr. Alexander Scott. What's your read on that?
Yeah, and interestingly, in both cases, I'm not sure either the type of person who is, so angry at vaccine, requirements or masking or anything like that. The type of person who feels that passionately probably has already made up their mind. And the type of person who's going to be influenced by Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott's endorsement at the last minute has also probably already made up their minds. I'm not sure that it matters all that much to the electoral math here. What it does is I do think it shows you Helena Foulkes has had a good probably 2-week run of this narrative that she has some momentum in this race. So, she's feeling really good. You had Speaker Pelosi in town. Again, I'm not sure that anybody that thinks, critically and says, I just don't know who I'm going to support. But now that Nancy Pelosi says I'm with Helena Foulkes, I don't think people think that way. But it adds to this narrative. I think as somebody said to me today, Nancy Pelosi, I don't care how good a friend she was with Helena Foulkes' mother, if she saw polling that showed this a 15-point race, she would not be coming to town, right? Yeah. So, Speaker Pelosi is as much of a political animal as there is in this country. She probably needed to see something that showed that this is a somewhat competitive race. And so I think all of it speaks to kind of this Foulkes momentum, and it's a matter of, can she kind of get there, by election, by tomorrow, by Tuesday, or, is Dan McKee going to kind of hold on to this victory? Because his base is pretty strong. This guy is solid, through and through. It's not a 50%, number that he needs. It's 35, 36%. He seems to be almost there.
Right. And we keep hearing from certain corners anyway, the idea that this is another John Robitaille. If he'd had 2 more weeks, he would have been governor. But has Helena Foulkes been able to, get the right people behind her, but just not enough time to get other people to know that she has the right people behind her? I guess that's the question.
Well, here's the fascinating thing. If Helena Foulkes loses by any number tomorrow, 1 vote or 100,000 votes, she's run the worst campaign in the history of Rhode Island politics. $4 million. You could have started. I was talking to people about Helena Foulkes running for governor a year and a half ago, right? This was a long time ago. Took her a long time to get in the race. She, bobbed and weaved. Didn't know if she wanted to be in. Then, 6 months out, all of her people said, this is a 100-day race. 100 days out, they said it's a 6-week race. 6 weeks out, they said it's a month. A month, they said it's 2 weeks. Last week, I was at the debate, at Channel 12's debate, and somebody on the campaign staff said, oh, it's a 1-week race. That's all it is. If she loses and her campaign starts to say that they needed 2 more weeks, they knew when the election was, this will be an embarrassment for them given the amount of money that she's going to spend. Flip side of that, she wins by 1 vote, and they ran the perfect campaign, right? That's what this is going to come down. It's going to say, didn't matter that nobody knew who she was 90 days ago. It didn't matter at all because she won. So, this is the way it works out in every election, but it is true. She's coming on strong. She's the horse that is, taking off towards the end. Dan McKee's just trying to kind of fend her off.
Yeah, no question about it. And left out of this conversation, at least here in these final hours of the pre-election day period, Nellie Gorbea, who at one point was, according to some polls, the front runner here. Now, you never got the sense that Nellie had the name recognition that, I remember she would come on radio sometimes and say, well, I was in Marshall's or Dave's Market, and people came up to me and they say, hey, Secretary of State, answer these questions for me or whatever it is. She really didn't have the name or face recognition that her position as Secretary of State alone would take her all the way to governor. At the same time, you felt like she was really in this thing. Maybe she still is, but she's not in the thick of these final conversations here.
Yeah, I mean, our polling, the Globe's polling, had her in the lead, right? We were the one public poll that actually put her in front in this race, and that was a while ago, right? That's June, so it's a long time ago, or July, and I think you hit it on the head. She ran for a long time. Everybody counted her out, right? If you think about this, we talked about at the beginning, going back to 2014, who's going to run for governor in 8 years. It was always McKee, Gorbea, and State Treasurer Seth Magaziner, right? Those were always the 3 kind of name brand people, maybe the mayor of Providence, that kind of thing. But those 3, Nellie Gorbea was always the one that people said, she'll never have enough money to do it. She'll never have enough name recognition. Well, remember, she got in the race first last year, and it was, again, to raise money. She ran a really good race for, 10 months, 11 months. And then you come down to the end, she's had a little bit of a fiasco when it comes to some of the voting equipment, that kind of situation. I think that probably hurt her. She's being hurt to some degree by this idea of the Helena momentum. I still think she's going to put on a pretty good showing. And it's funny, we're in some ways counting her out, and yet if she were to win the race, I wouldn't be completely stunned. This would not be, out of nowhere, Nellie Gorbea won the race. It would be more of, we'd start to say, wait a minute, maybe we were a little bit wrong about the momentum that Helena had. So it is not insane that she could, pull this thing off, but it certainly does appear, the thing that has struck me about the Nellie Gorbea campaign throughout has been just how often she kind of gets forgotten about news-wise, right? There were points in the summer and late spring where she would go a week, 10 days without ever being on the news. For a long time she wasn't on television, things like that, with commercials, I mean. Meanwhile, Dan McKee was on the news constantly. Helena Folks with paid advertising was on the news constantly. And so there were times where you almost think Nellie Gorbea could have, gone out and grabbed attention by being maybe a little more substantive, by, being much more of the policy wonk in the race. She never quite did that. And here at the end, when she's a little bit out of money, she has struggled to kind of fight back against some of the criticism against her.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you wonder if the independent expenditure, the ad that a lot of people have pointed to, the Latino Victory Fund, as in some cases, potentially violating campaign finance law and so on and so forth, the average person doesn't have a clue about this. So I guess the question is, how much do negative ads really play into getting a candidate over the hump? And in Nellie's case, she's right there with the other 2 candidates in terms of McKee and Folks, in terms of laying out bisectional negative ads that try to say, hey, look, of the 3 frontrunners, I'm the best.
Well, the thing that's been interesting, if you think about the Helena Folks campaign for a long time, the thing I was struck by about her was she couldn't quite find the message that resonated, right? So she was the big executive, then she was, going to be the education governor, then she was going to kind of be a small business governor, and she was going to kind of be all things to all people, right? And campaigns go through this all the time. I think similarly, the negative ads or the what resonates with Rhode Islanders, I think no campaign did a very good job of actually, finding something that strikes a chord. Very late in this election, we've started to hear about opioids and kind of Helena's role at CVS. To me, that seems like an issue that would resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, or COVID management.
Good point. I'm less certain that an attack on, Nellie Gorbea and, what her running, illegal ads, nobody cares, right? I don't even know that anybody cares all that much about, whether or not 55 people in Providence, were voting, with the wrong ballot in their hands. So, it speaks to competence to some degree. It speaks to that. So I suppose I can see it. But, there wasn't even look at Dan McKee. We all thought Dan McKee, the big attack on Dan McKee was going to be the ILO group, the education contract, or Tony Silva, his former chief of staff. You didn't really see that as that certainly was an attempt to go after him. His numbers have not fallen that we've seen at all. So I'm not sure that punch landed in a significant way.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the wetlands controversy with Tony Silva is something that, other than you bringing it up here, I really don't remember the last time that's come up in terms of an attack or even just a general mention in this campaign.
Right?
Yeah, it disappeared.
You nailed it. That was one of those ones that even after Tony Silva was cleared of any wrongdoing, you could have run a negative ad just with what Peter Nerona said about that whole fiasco, right? That could have been in and of itself some way to attack. But people, I think what the campaigns learned was, particularly the challengers, Nellie Gorbea and Helena Foulkes, and I think to some degree, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but Republican Ashley Kalis is realizing this too. Dan McKee is more popular than they all realized. They thought you could drag him down. He was always this kind of waffling, stumbly, mumbly governor. He's very likable. He doesn't perform the best on the debate stage. He's not the most dynamic figure by any means, but I think people like him. I think that ad is the best ad. The I Live With My Mother ad was probably the best out of the cycle, and I think the second best out of the cycle was his next one, which was the ripping up of the car tax. Dan McKee has quietly run a really good campaign, especially, I think, the last 2 months.
Absolutely. And even the signage around, signs don't vote. We know that. It's not in that context, but they're visible. And they're now, over the last few weeks and even the last month or so, you see a lot of his signs. Again, what does that mean? It could mean zero, but it could also mean that there's business support. There's private sector support behind him that isn't leaning towards folks.
Yeah, signs don't vote, but when's the last time you saw a Matt Brown, Cynthia Mendez sign, right? You see a few of them here and there. Again, they're going to do their numbers. They're not going to come close to winning. At least Matt Brown's not going to come close to winning the governor's race. So, sure, signs don't vote. Facebook, Twitter doesn't vote, but I'd rather have more of it than less of it.
That's for sure. With Matt Brown in particular, but also with Dr. Munoz, who you had a column about last week, I wonder how many people are going to assess if they haven't voted yet and they go in tomorrow and they say, look, in my heart, I'm progressive. And that's where I want to see the world go. At the same time, candidate X, be it Foulkes or McKee, wherever you stand, I can't imagine them winning the governor. So I'm going to defensively vote for candidate Y in this case. Let's say you say, well, I could never imagine someone who was a CVS executive, as in Foulkes being governor. It's Gina 2.0. So I'm going to go either Nellie or McKee instead of Munoz or Brown. Do you think there's going to be a lot of that, or are the progressives going to be there no matter what for their candidate, be it Brown or Munoz?
I think that if you loved – I think Dr. Munoz is a hard one because he doesn't have any real support, right? If you're polling at 1%, you were talking about only a handful of people, generally speaking anyway. Obviously, I've written this. I think Lewis is a smart guy. He's a thoughtful guy, and he deserves some place in government. He was not ready to run for governor, and the campaign that he's put forward kind of shows that. When it comes to Matt Brown, I think the people who really loved Matt Brown and who love the brand of not just I'm a progressive, but I'm progressive and I'm part of the co-op or I'm part of this movement, those people are going to vote for Matt Brown and he's going to get his 5, 8, 10% potentially. I think that we sometimes, you and I and other journalists, maybe we think, okay, well, you identify as progressive, that means you must be with Matt Brown. I don't think that's the case, right? I'll point you back to 2014 when you had a three-way race for governor, Democratic primary, Raimondo, Pell, Angel Tavares. There were progressives who were strongly with Gina Raimondo, even though she was this person who had kind of broke the unions to some degree, and she was this corporate Democrat. Well, if you were a progressive who really wanted to see the first female governor, you went with Gina Raimondo, even if you didn't like some of the other things she did. Angel Tavares had big fights with the public employee unions. He still, came across as progressive when he needed to. Certainly Clay Pell came across that way. Yeah. So I think these guys, my guess is Nellie Gorbea probably pulls some of the progressive vote. I think she'll do fine. But I know progressives who are going to be with Helena Foulkes. I know some people who might say that they're progressive that are going to be with Dan McKee. Less so, right? Dan McKee's got a more moderate kind of tact and he's going to have labor with him and, that there's a divide there about what's progressive, all that kind of stuff. But, look, just as we all thought, Matt Brown, Luis Munoz, they're going to be a factor in that they lower the win number for whoever wins, right? So if they combine for 10% of the vote, now you're competing for 32, 33% of the vote potentially to win, as opposed to needing 40%. So they're a factor in that way.
Definitely. Really interesting. Ashley Kalis will be on the sideline tomorrow, barring the upset of the century. What's his name? Jonathan Riccitelli. I think I went to high school with that guy when he was Jonathan Teft, as your news organization reported. He had a different name, bunch of run-ins with the law. He might get less than 1% in whatever couple hundred Republican primary votes there are. I mean, not literally a couple hundred. There'll be more than that. But who does Ashley Kalis match up best against in your mind? Who does she want to see win?
This is where I put my analyst hat on and say one thing, and then everything I hear goes a different way, including from the Kalis camp. I think Ashley Kalis would love to face Dan McKee for in this race. I think you can kind of run back the Helena Foulkes campaign, maybe run a more aggressive campaign than Helena Foulkes ran, but same idea, right? I'm going to be the education governor. You go much harder on the attacks when you're a Republican who quite frankly isn't from here. Ashley Kalis doesn't owe anybody anything. She can be, she can be much more aggressive. Some would say, a bomb thrower, flamboyant here. But whatever you call that, she's going to have the money to spend, and I think she could be a real thorn in Governor McKee's side if he gets through. I think that's less the case. I think if Helena Foulkes comes on and wins this race, it's going to be really hard for somebody who's not from here and who, doesn't have any deep name recognition to beat somebody who's going to have plenty of money to spend, who, by this time, Thursday, if Helena Foulkes is the Democratic nominee, everyone's going to have jumped behind her. She's going to suddenly be just like Gina Raimondo. She's going to have plenty of support and all that. Yeah. She probably will have the president come here, all kinds of things like that. She'll have lots of momentum. And so I would think that Kalis wants to face McKee. What I hear is a little different. They'd love to face Nellie Gorbea. That doesn't look like they don't think that's going to happen now. And they think they match up okay with somebody like Helena Foulkes. So it'll be really interesting. The number one thing is Ashley Kalis will be a factor in this race. When you have that much money to spend, when you're the Republican nominee, even in a place like Rhode Island, you can really resonate. And this is not going to be a 70-30 race.
Right.
At worst, I think it's a 15-point race, no matter who the Democrat is. At worst, and potentially much better for Ashley Kalis.
That's really fascinating stuff. All right, we wait and see how that plays out tomorrow night. If you're listening on the day this is released, Monday, which is probably the only day you should listen to this unless you're doing historical research, we'll be live tomorrow night here on WPRO, also on my social media. Dan will join us at one point throughout either from phone or in studio. We'll figure that out as the night plays out. also Jim Hummel, and we'll break down the governor's race as the returns come in, and we'll see if, do you get the sense that we'll have any idea who won tomorrow in terms of early voting and tabulation, so on and so forth?
I think we will, from everything I'm hearing. It looks like you will get those numbers. I mean, unless you have a race that's, a couple of thousand votes. Yep. If we're talking 1-2%, I think we will. I think that would, carry on just as it would always. Yep. I don't think we're going to be in a situation like 2020. Forget the general election in 2020, but if you go back to that primary when we waited 4 or 5 days for winners, I don't think we're going to see that. I think closer races, it's possible that you end up, wanting recounts, things like that. I think the race in Providence for mayor is very, very close. So that, it's possible you won't have a winner there. But governor, my guess is we'll probably know.
On the mayor of Providence race, what an interesting scenario it's played out. At one point, Brett Smiley seemed like the heir apparent to Jorge Elorza. There was no really disputing that. Over the last several weeks, though, with an endorsement from Mayor Elorza and the continuation of support and a formalized endorsement from Mayor Tavares, Gonzalo Cuervo has emerged as arguably a legitimate co-frontrunner. Nerva LaFortune doesn't seem to have quite the same juice, even though she's got the teachers behind her. What's your take on Providence mayor going into tomorrow?
Oh, I think it's a great race, and it's just for if you just love politics. And Bill, you and I have been, recording podcasts together and talking about Providence politics. This is, the place that I find most special. I love it, and I love the math of it all. And in this case, I think you summed it up really well. I think a lot of us, myself included, all thought Brett Smiley was the clear favorite, and all Gonzalo Cuervo has done is work and fight. And, as Jorge Elorza, when he endorsed him, a couple weeks ago, kind of summed up, he said, Gonzalo speaks the language of the city. And he didn't just mean that he speaks Spanish. He meant Gonzalo gets the vibe of the city. He, he's much more of a kind of a night owl than certainly our current mayor and our last mayor, and certainly than Brett Smiley or Nerva LaFortune are. He kind of gets the city in that way. I think that has resonated with a lot of voters. Now, the flip side is, the interesting thing is this could end up being a situation where Nerva LaFortune stayed strong enough where she kind of takes away from Gonzalo. Yeah. LaFortune, at different points in this race, people questioned whether she should even be there, right? She didn't raise a lot of money. Going into the summer, there was still a chance that maybe she takes a look at this and she says, you know what, I'll stay in my city council seat. All those candidates that are running for her council seat would have backed out if she decided to stay put. She would have had a free shot to be council. Maybe you become council president, all those kind of things. And instead, she believed in herself when nobody believed in her. And the returns are there for her. I followed her around. I wrote a column on her a couple of weeks ago, and followed her around and just watched her at an event, a meet and greet. And I get it. She's somebody who, who resonates. She's got a good story. Talk about somebody who speaks the language of the city. She can, she has a story for every neighborhood. She went to Mount Pleasant. She grew up in Washington Park. Now represents the East Side. So she has lots of connections. I think she's run out of time and money, and so it's really hard to be organized. And then you look at Brett Smiley, has always had the most money, has always had to some degree, the most name recognition. Look, he is, I think he's as qualified a mayor as there can be. I think he's ready to do the job, and so he's kind of relied on that. The question is, has he been able? His bugaboo has always been coming off the East Side. Can he win votes, in the neighborhoods? And we're going to find out, right? Yeah. This is a matter of he's a guy who probably should do very well on the East Side. I think he and Nerva will probably split up the East Side. There's a lot of votes there. What Smiley's doing, this is going way too inside baseball, probably, Bill, but what Smiley's doing is building this weird coalition of East Side voters and then Buddy Cianci voters.
Yes.
I mean, that's what he's doing.
2014 Buddy Cianci
2014
voters. Yeah.
Buddy Cianci voters. And you could call those Mike Solomon voters to some degree, too. Yep. But that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to carry, a bunch of votes on the East Side, go win Mount Pleasant, Elmhurst, the Charles neighborhood, places like that. And he he thinks that's enough to put him over the top. It might be, I mean, I think this is a race that's incredibly close. I think that endorsement from Elorza was stinging to him. I know it hurt his feelings, but more importantly, I think it did boost. It boosts Gonzalo Cuervo, particularly I think among kind of low information voters. A thing that a lot of you and I are taping in the WPRO studios. A lot of WPRO listeners don't quite realize is the mayor is popular. He is much more popular than what you would believe if you only listen to, criticism over parking meters or giving meters or any other meter that the mayor has installed over the last 8 years.
The so-called reparations and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the mayor's a guy who is, and I've been super critical of him over 8 years about lots of different things, but he resonates, he's popular. And having the last two mayors, Angel Taveras and Jorge Elorza, with you, it suggests that somebody believes in you. And I think so. I think this one's razor thin. That's the race. I mean, I just love Providence, so it's fun. I think that's the race of the night tomorrow.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what happens from Providence Water as your Providence Water Board, one of the polling locations that is very indicative of where things are going. You'll be there, I'm sure.
I'm obsessed with precinct. I've always put out on Twitter on like the day of elections, I tell people my favorite precincts in Providence, which is way nerdy. But Providence Water Supply is a good one. By the way, it's a little bit of a bellwether for both the city and the state. Be interesting to see how the governor's race plays out there. There's also the Senate Sam Bell and David Salvatore race there. So yes, I will be at the Providence Water Supply at about 8:05 tomorrow night, trying to figure out who won that precinct.
Yeah, I can't wait. Follow Dan on Twitter, of course, for up to the second coverage of that, and we'll have it for you on WPRO during the live broadcast. A couple more minutes here on just some of the down ballot races. Let's actually start in that General Assembly zone. I find that there are two really interesting races, one of which I think is going to be a lot closer, that being Bell Salvatore. The other is Enrique Sanchez challenging Anastasia Williams. I feel like Williams has done everything to pull away, but I know Sanchez is out there doing a lot of door knocking and I guess getting a lot of good response at the doors. That's anecdotal. That's just coming from their campaign in terms of what they've told me. But that Salvatore Bell race, it's as progressive or leftist a neighborhood, really, as you'll probably find in the state for the most part. It's hard to imagine that with the right to life endorsement that Salvatore received and so on and so forth, that he'd be able to pull it off. But what are you hearing on the ground?
So I live there, right? So I mean, you want to talk. There are people who said, and I've been critical of the statewide candidates, even to some degree the mayoral candidates, about how kind of sleepy the last couple of months have been. I think you've talked about this on your podcast a bunch.
Yep.
Let me tell you something. In Senate District 5, the race for Senate there is not sleepy at all. I mean, every single house has a Salvatore Bell sign on it. You've hit it on the head here in that race. David Salvatore, by the way, very popular councilman, very successful councilman. He was good at his job. Remember, got all the way to the council presidency for a little bit there after Aponte, had to step away. And so, Salvatore's a formidable candidate. He had a ton of money. He works wildly hard. I saw him one day in the summer, 99-degree day, and he's knocking doors on Cathedral Avenue, just dripping sweat. He works really hard. He's a good guy, and that's why I think people are giving him something of a chance. The district, though, I live in what I think people would probably call the more conservative part of the district. We're right by St. Pius Church, and that tends to be kind of a more conservative area, just traditionally, more Catholic, that kind of thing. But Sam Bell resonates, man. He might be the perfect representative of his district, right? You go then all the way down the street and down to a different neighborhood, kind of the West End, that Federal Hill area, which is part of this district too, much more progressive. I mean, by the way, I think that's where David Siegel could win Providence, not the race. I don't think he's going to win the race, but he could win Providence because of all those votes that are going to come from there. It's what's going to fuel if Gonzalo Cuervo wins this mayor's race. It's going to be because of that Federal Hill West End area where so many progressive votes are. And that's why my gut would be that Bell will hold on, because I think he's really popular in those places. He's bilingual, so on the doors it helps with Latino voters. I'm surprised, though, I will say, on the other race, which is kind of part of the same district, that House race, I think Enrique Sanchez is going to win.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he's going to win. I think everything I've heard from reports there is that he's working really, really hard. I think Anastasia Williams has had some close calls in recent elections. Sure. I think he's got a really good chance to win this race. But Anastasia Williams would never surprise me if she won. She's always managed to survive. But it seems like Enrique Sanchez has done a lot to to put it together, and he has that support of Sam Bell and some of the other progressives. And so I think Enrique Sanchez is going to. That would be my prediction. I think he's going to win.
That's an amazing. It's amazing to think that with a race like that, just like the Bell Salvatore race, that people are so engaged in hyper local politics, and if nothing else, it's refreshing.
Makes you feel good.
Makes you feel alive. Does it matter that Sabina Matos blew off the Channel 10 and RWPRO Bartholomew Town debates, or does she win this lieutenant governor's race?
I think she wins the race. My guess would be she'll win. I think she's got a lot of the support. Does it matter? I mean, look, I read a column that was very critical of her not attending your debate or the Channel 10 debate, and they are not thrilled with me, and I think Rep Ruggiero's kind of run an ad that's been pointed that out. In the end, no. I mean, I think Sabina Matos is organized. This was a mistake, and I'm never going to not believe that it was a mistake for her to skip some debates. But Sabina Matos is a very formidable politician. She was a great council person. She was an effective council president to some degree, and she's of Providence. It's going to be really hard. It's really hard to win a statewide election if you get your clock cleaned in Providence, and I think that's probably what will happen with Senator Mendez and Rep Ruggiero.
It's going to be interesting. Congress, Seth Magaziner, is he going to pull this off?
Yeah, the fascinating thing is I think the race for second place here, to me, it'll probably be David Siegel, but certainly Joy Fox has a case to make. Obviously, Sarah Morgenthau has a case to make. I don't think Omar Ba's run the campaign that he probably wanted to, and resources wise, he's struggled. So I think it is a race for second, and it remains to be seen. That's the hot race of the general election. Obviously, Fung versus Magaziner, and all the cases that all these other candidates have made that I'm the best person for the second district to beat Alan Fung. Well, if Alan Fung wins, a lot of people are going to be able to have the right to say that. That said, Seth Magaziner, to his credit, has run, and I was super critical of Seth Magaziner running for Congress. He's run the best campaign of anybody in the state. Kept his head down, got his ads out there. He's raised all the money. He hasn't slipped at all, never made a mistake. There was nothing like that. And so while he was always a heavy favorite in the primary, he lived up to expectations, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think he's going to be a very tough candidate in the general.
And lastly, treasurer is very interesting because you have, I said this on Lively Experiment, you have in Stephen Pryor, the Gina Raimondo Alumni Network versus James Diosa, the Northern Rhode Island Mayoral Peer Group.
Yeah.
Who has more clout with, as Arlene Violet would say, Joe and Mary Public? What's your gut on this going in?
I don't think Joe and Mary Public care about either of
they
these
couldn't
two.
care less.
It is interesting, though, because the race, it's the only one that's been, kind of gloves off for an extended period of time, right? Those two do not like each other.
Yeah, the weird Twitter handle that they made over the Diosa camp made a fake Pryor Twitter handle, and there's been negative ads and just a vibe that hasn't been very
those two,
strong.
I mean, most likely to punch the other person in the face, I think would probably be the treasurer's race, which is fascinating because it's not it's not exactly the most aggressive office by any means.
Right.
But I think that one's too close to call, and I say that sort of. I wouldn't be surprised if either of them won kind of running away, but I just don't know which one. Yeah. And so I'm not necessarily predicting this is going to be a 1 or 2% race. Could be. It's a tough one to put your finger on, right? A couple of years ago, go back 8 years ago, Magaziner, everybody thought Frank Caprio making a comeback was going to be this story. And I remember it very well. Frank Caprio conceded the election at like 8:03 p.m. because one, he had seen some exit polls that were not looking very good for him. And he was right. He was the first person to concede that thing. This is not going to go that way, even if it looks like it's trending in a Diosa way. I don't think Stefan's going to concede, and vice versa. I think that one could go late into the night. It'll be interesting, and it's nice to have a down ballot race that has some energy behind it, I guess.
Yeah, no question about it. Right there is Dan McGowan. He is a columnist for the Boston Globe. Make sure you subscribe to Roadmap, his daily newsletter. Follow him on Twitter and subscribe to the Globe while you're at it. Tomorrow night on WPRO and across social media, it'll be election night in Rhode Island beginning at 8 p.m. I'll be hosting along with Jim Hummel. We'll have our own Steve Klampkin, Paul Zangari, Dan York in the field, Bill Haberman in studio. We'll also be joined at one point in studio and from the field by Dan McGowan here and some others as well. It should be a fun night. So again, tune in 99.7 FM, AM 630, 99.7 WPRO.com, or follow me on Twitter at Bill Bartholomew for that live coverage. All right, here we are. Get some sleep tonight. Enjoy the Dunkin' refreshers, and we'll see you tomorrow.
I'm going to be living on Dunkin' for the next couple of 48 hours probably.
Maybe they'll sponsor tomorrow night's show.
They should.
That's it.
They should.
All right.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.